Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Cosmere chat. I am joined by Tom Orange for the very first time. We just had our first conversation face to face for the last few minutes. It's been very, very lovely. Before we talk about the Cosmere, though, I do want to know where the orange part came from. Like,
Okay, yeah.
what is the background of being Tom Orange?
It's just my favorite color.
It's just the favorite color.
Yeah, it's just my, and then I thought it would be funny to just always wear orange in all of my videos. So,
Yeah.
and that's just kind of the shtick I have been going with. So it's not anything super creative or anything. It was just my favorite color. It is funny. I I didn't realize how much orange stuff I had until I was
I
like, oh,
was
I need to
gonna
like,
ask,
yeah.
yeah, if you went out and bought orange things for BookTube, or if it was just magical that you already had all of these.
No, I already just had a bunch of orange shirts, and then like my gym bag over here is orange, my foam roller is orange, my water bottle is also orange. I didn't realize how much orange stuff I had until I like started thinking about it.
Yeah, apparently I'm not the only one who was thinking about how much orange, so many orange shirts. I also think that every time I watch your videos, I look for the logo. I'm like, oh, it's different. So it's a different orange shirt.
Yeah, it's not the same one every time. I
That's
have
so
thought
funny.
about just buying like a 6 pack of orange t-shirts off Amazon, so they're the same, but I think it's kind of funny
Consistent.
that
Well,
they're all
apparently there's
different.
people like me who are super weird and are looking for the logo. So maybe you should keep up what you're doing and then keep everyone on their toes. But that's besides the point. So
Yeah.
we are going to talk about the Cosmere because, like me, I believe you had not read the Cosmere pretty much until last year,
Yeah,
correct?
correct. I had read one other thing by Sanderson. It's outside of
Okay.
the Cosmere. It was called the original that he co-wrote with somebody else.
Okay.
That's the only other like Sanderson exposure I had had, and
Okay.
then I was just like, it's time to finally do this. So we are both in really bad storms right now, and we were just talking about this before we started that her power was going to go out right as we started, and I have a feeling that might be what happened, which would actually be kind of funny. So we'll see if we'll give her a couple minutes, and it'll just be a my stream on her channel. She had mentioned that her power had been flickering all on and off all day, so that's of course it happened right now. That's really funny. Yeah, I think it is the case. But I guess I'll keep talking and just mentioning that, my Cosmere journey. I can double check and see. So the first Cosmere I read was Mistborn. I have my spreadsheet up so I can see when I finished this. The Final Empire was the first one I read, and I finished the Final Empire on the 26th of January in 2023. No, yes, 2023. We're in 2024 now. So that was the my first like dive into it, and then I finished Sunlit. When did I finish Sunlit? It was in December sometime. Might have been right around. Yep, the 17th. So it took me from I finished that on the 26th of January and finished Sunlit Man, which obviously didn't come out till later, but didn't even have a chance to read it before until it finished on the 12th. So that's kind of how long it took me. So I did basically use the whole year, or I guess just a little bit under a year. Yep, we had some pretty bad storms earlier. I think they were saying a tornado maybe touched down somewhere about 40 minutes away from me. And then they thought we were in like a warning for an hour or two today, and we have a bunch of flooding right now still, and it's still super windy. So after finishing, do you agree with the Reddit recommended reading order? So I think I used the Reddit reading order. I think I got it off our Cosmere, and so I'm pretty sure that's the one I used. Um, and yeah, I think it was pretty good. I think it gives you a decent path where it doesn't just throw you straight into Elantris, which for me was definitely the weakest of all of Sanderson's Cosmere stuff. Outside of some of the like the novellas and stuff, I didn't like love any of them. I'm not really a big novella person most of the time. I think for the most part, they're just fine. But as far as like actual novels go, Elantris was my least favorite, and I see a lot of people saying to start there because it's a standalone. It gets you a taste for Sanderson's writing, and I really disagree. I think Sanderson has become a much better writer since he wrote Elantris. I don't Personally, I don't find the world of Elantris to be nearly as entertaining or anything as most of his other worlds. So I think the Cosmere or the Reddit order has you start with Mistborn, which I think is a much better starting point. If I had to pick one, it would definitely either be to start with Era 1 Mistborn or Warbreaker. I think you can get away with. Yeah, okay, you're right. Emperor's Soul is definitely very good. That is definitely super super well done. I was thinking more of what are they? You have like the Hope of Elantris, the 11th Metal, which is like 11 pages, so does it even really count? Some of the Allomancer Jack stuff was fine and funny, but I don't know. I don't think it's really all that necessary. And then yeah, and then White Sand and all that stuff is also kind of down there with Elantris, in my opinion, because oh, you never finished Edge Dancer. I didn't mind Edge Dancer. I mean, it's down there too. I'm looking at my list. It's like right mixed in with White Sands and it's like White Sands Volume 3, 1, Edge Dancer, White Sands Volume 2. So I wasn't like the biggest fan of Edge Dancer either. But I think I know a lot of people don't like Lift. That's the Lift one, right? I mean, she's fine, I guess. We'll see. I think there's some very interesting things going on with her that we haven't got around to. That like there's some weird Cosmere kind of stuff going on, but we haven't got it yet. So, and I think Sanderson has said she's going to be one of the not POV, but like flashback characters in the second arc of Stormlight. So that'll be interesting. Maybe finally get some answers because we don't know much about her. Joanna, you couldn't get into Lift either. I'm not there yet. I do think that just some of the interesting Cosmere stuff is going to be there. At least I hope so. It seems like there's some weird, different Cosmere stuff with her. That's really the thing I'm attached to with Lift. She's a little silly, which sometimes it's nice to get like that breath of fresh air of something different inside of some of those big tomes, especially like Rhythm of War. I needed that little bit of just something a little different, but yeah, she's definitely. Yeah, pancakes are great. I'm hoping I can handle older Lift better. Yes. Yeah, I feel like, that's something with her where, I mean, I think we were going to do Cosmere spoilers in this, so I'm going to, but, I think she's a lot older than she's actually portrayed as or supposed to be. I'm a little rusty on this. I should have looked it up, but I'm pretty sure, there's some kind of weird magic thing where she has like this fear of getting older and has like basically wished herself.
I'm so sorry. My power went
off
okay. As anticipated.
We said it was going to happen.
Oh my gosh. This is exactly what I was saying. So let's just see here. Perfect. I will go as long as the weather gods allow this to happen. I'm so sorry. I was like, I'm trying to message him and no data's going through.
That's okay. I was filibustering.
Perfect. Okay. So the last thing I heard was that you had read a non-Cosmere Sanderson book, and yes. I had not read anything by Sanderson. My only exposure to Sanderson was that he co-finished Wheel of Time.
I did read those too. I should have. To me, I always just say Robert Jordan for all those,
That's
even though
fair.
Sanderson helped.
That's
But
fair.
I guess I do have those last three Wheel of Time books too.
Yeah. So I actually didn't read those books. I'm nowhere near that part of Wheel of Time, but
Okay.
my circle that did read it really didn't love the Sanderson ending. In fact, they hate it. So all of my exposure to Sanderson was really quite negative until I started watching BookTube and then saw all these people being like, Mistborn, 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 Mistborn's the best trilogy ever. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to have to give this trilogy a try. So what was it that got you into the Cosmere exactly?
Yeah, so I do this thing where I know I have books that I'm going to really like and like love, and then I hold off and don't read them. I just like keep them. I'm that's like my treat out in the distance when I get to it. I have a bunch of books on my TBR that I like. Sun Eater, I've known about that series for years at this point, and I know I'm going to absolutely love it. And yet I haven't started it, and that's kind of what I had been doing with Sanderson. And
really? Okay.
Yeah, I was like, I know I'm going to love, especially, I knew I was going to love Stormlight. Mistborn, I was a little bit more iffy on if I was going to love. And then the year of the Sanderson thing happened, and I was like, if I'm going to do it, this is like the perfect time to do it. These books are going to come out.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, you have wanted to read these for how long? And so I was like, okay, I'm going to actually do it now. So that's kind of how I had held off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I held off for way longer than I should have.
Yes, Joanna. My group hates it.
Yeah, that's really surprising to me because
they are really the minority, I've come to learn, but they also haven't read anything else by Sanderson, so I don't know. I just don't know what the thing really is. But my husband specifically said he felt he knew when Sanderson was writing a chapter versus when Jordan was writing a chapter. And that for him was very jarring. And he just couldn't really get into it. Yes, it's my local real life friends.
Not to get too much into the Wheel of Time because I could definitely do that. But I will say when Sanderson first took over, there's one character in particular where you can definitely tell it's Sanderson.
Matt.
Yes, yeah, you can tell. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can, and so yeah, I can understand that. I think by the end, like the last book, he kind of had gotten his feet settled, but I can definitely see, especially because so many people love Matt.
That was the consensus in my group is that Matt was everyone's favorite character collectively, so it was really disheartening.
I could see that.
What Cosmere book did you end up reading first?
The Final Empire.
Okay, that's what I started with too. So I binged the first trilogy. I did boom, 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 back to back. Did you do a similar thing?
Yeah, so I found a reading list on Reddit. I think it was the Cosmere Reddit to be specific. And they had a reading list, and I was like, I'm going to use this. This is what I'm going to go with. So yeah, I think it had me go the first trilogy, and then into Elantris was like the next thing outside.
That's exactly what I did.
Okay, yeah.
I did that, and then Warbreaker, I want to say, was the next one for me.
I could look. I can't remember exactly what my order was, but it was something like that. I might have actually even done. No, Warbreaker was after Elantris, because I remember reading Elantris and just being not let down, but just being like, yeah, I can tell this was his first book.
So that was going to be a question I had for you. But first I want to talk about Mistborn just a little bit. So for Era 1, I'm in the minority. I feel that book 2 for me is hands down the best of the 3 out of all the Mistborn books.
Oh, wow.
Are we still here?
Yes, we are.
Okay. I can't tell what's going on with my weather. I'm so sorry. What was your favorite of Mistborn Era 1?
The Final Empire.
Okay.
Yeah.
So were you happy with the ending of Hero of Ages without being too spoilery?
Yeah. I think in general, there wasn't like a big disparity in my rankings. I happened to like the first one most, and I would be curious on if I went back and reread them if I'd still feel the same way.
Sure.
I think part of it was I had built up so much anticipation to finally get to Sanderson.
Yeah.
With that being like my first foray into it, and I will say that with how that book ends is not how I expected that to happen. And
Okay.
so I think all of that together really keeps that one elevated for me. But I don't like, so Well of Ascension is my least favorite of those three, but I don't think it's like that much. I don't think it's that much worse than any of the other two.
Sure.
And so, yeah, same thing with how Hero of Ages ends. I was not expecting that to be the ending. That was I don't know. I found it to be really an interesting take because I was always curious, knowing that there was multiple eras, like how was this transition going to go?
Right.
And that is not how I expected it to end, but I liked it. I thought it was creative and different, and yeah, definitely went in a way I wasn't expecting, which I appreciate because, you know, a lot of books can be so formulaic and the same kind of things over and over again. So I did appreciate that a lot with the first trilogy.
And Elantris, so funny story, I just had my husband read Elantris, which was his first Sanderson novel that wasn't Wheel of Time. Because we made a deal that I'm learning to play chess and I got to pick 3 Sanderson novels that he has to read. So I went with Elantris, Warbreaker, and Emperor's Soul because I initially wanted Stormlight Archive and he was like, absolutely not. It's way too long.
Too long. Yeah.
Okay, we'll go with these 3 and it'll give you kind of different samples of his writing. And it was interesting for me to kind of relive reading Elantris through him because I read it last year at this point. And I remember when I read it initially, I really liked the world setting for Elantris. I thought that the concept for the story was really fascinating. Serene as a character, I was a bit iffy on because in terms of formulaic stuff, I found that she was kind of that classic fantasy woman trope. And I was like, oh, this is a bit pedantic and boring. But I don't love the Sanderlanche the way that other people really love it. And it is so prominent in Elantris. Like, I forgot how bad it is in Elantris.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of, I did read that one quite a while ago, but yeah, that one really does just kind of like pick up super quick. Yeah, it just kind of comes like, you know, right from nowhere and just really picks up. With Elantris, I thought that the ailment that's going on, I found that whole thing pretty interesting and how that was being handled and like how it affected people.
Yeah.
But outside of that, nothing else really grabbed me all that much from that entire book. It is the one that I have probably forgotten the most about.
Okay, interesting.
Absolutely.
So, my favorite of the Cosmere is Warbreaker. So I'm really hoping that you like Warbreaker.
I did like Warbreaker. Yeah. I liked Warbreaker. It's not my favorite is Words of Radiance.
That's my second favorite, so that's a good choice.
Yeah, I did like Warbreaker. I thought for a while that I didn't like it as much, but then as I kept reading it, I think towards the end I just kind of really started connecting with the characters and everything, and ended up really appreciating it more.
Warbreaker has my favorite characters from the Cosmere. Lightsong and Nightblood are my 2 favorites. I love Hoyd. I love Hoyd so much. But I feel like I don't know if I can. I mean, Hoyd is everywhere, right? So I mean, like he's obviously a Cosmere character, but I try to think of just book-wise. I'm like, okay, who's my favorite character? And I'm like, okay, well, in Warbreaker, it's Nightblood and Lightsong because Lightsong's humor hit all the right notes for me. And Nightblood is everything I want from an awakened object.
Nightblood is great. Yes. Yeah. Nightblood is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I always love that. The cult ritual scenes. Yeah, it definitely does come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And my husband was really actually enjoying Elantris up until this point. He was like, I think the world is interesting. And I was like, maybe I've lured him in. And then he got to the end and he was like 6 out of 10. No. And I was like, ooh, maybe not.
Yeah. I think I gave it a 3 out of 5, which, because I mean, I liked it. Yeah. I mean, I liked it. It just wasn't anything special. And definitely after coming from Era 1 to Elantris is it's a little bit of a letdown.
There is a big discrepancy, I feel like, in terms of the writing. I enjoy Elantris too, but I do think that there are some problematic aspects of that book. But Warbreaker for me was really, I think, what pulled me in. So did you have, I mean, at this point, I was kind of committed. I was like, all right, I think the worlds and the magic that he does are pretty interesting. I'm going to carry on with it. but I feel like Warbreaker was like, yes, I'm in this now and I'm excited to be here. So did you have a book that you felt specifically like that?
Honestly, the Final Empire.
Okay.
I was like, if this is, because I hear a lot of people say that's one of his better books, and I was like, I hear a lot of people say Stormlight is really one of the only things better than that first trilogy. And so when I read that, and I was like, this is really good. If he is even a little bit better in the Stormlight archives, then I'm definitely in. And so I had just kind of committed to it from that point. And I mean, I'm pretty sure I did read Warbreaker right after Elantris, which was such a nice like tick back up after. It did give me like that extra momentum that like didn't kill the hype really.
For me, I think I then after Warbreaker, I'm pretty sure I read Secret History, which I know is definitely not the recommended reading order for that. But I was actually really happy that I read Secret History when I did, because I found then going forward into my Cosmere reads, I was like, oh, I picked up on certain things that I might not otherwise have picked up on. And I found that really enjoyable.
Yeah, that's a book that kind of broke my brain a little bit with how Cosmere, like, obviously it's very Cosmere heavy tie-in, just a lot of stuff going on. That's one I should probably reread, because after reading everything else, I probably would understand it a lot better.
Yes, Daniel, I agree. He does like to have that big momentous thing at the end, but especially in the Stormlight books when they're so long, the Sanderlanche is like a few hundred pages.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's the length of other people's whole books, but that's fine, which I actually really appreciate a lot more, because I prefer a slow paced ending that leaves things settled, as opposed to that just like bombardment of information kind of coming out of nowhere.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings with the Sanderlanche as well, because part of me is like, it's so much all at once that it's like, can we like breathe in here somewhere?
Yeah, exactly.
And I know people love it, that it's that build and build and build, and then all of a sudden that explosion. But yeah, I'm more with you with I would like it to be able to breathe a little bit. And I'm not saying we don't get any, like falling actions or anything, any of that, but it is so much all at once that and I think from reading The Wheel of Time, I think he got a little bit of that from Robert Jordan. Robert Jordan definitely, he obviously was a big Robert Jordan fan, and then kind of picked that up from, writing those books.
Yes.
So I see those influences there, but for some reason I do think they work a little bit better in Wheel of Time. Maybe that's just my own opinion, but I do think that's kind of where it comes from.
I think so too. When I started reading Wheel of Time successfully, because I had tried a few times before and just couldn't get into it this past year. And when I read Dragon Reborn, I was like, oh, like, this is where it comes from. And it was so obvious. I finished that book and put it down, and I was like, it's no wonder they asked Sanderson to finish this series. Like, no wonder. It's the same style of writing. But Oathbringer, I actually loved the ending of Oathbringer.
Yes, I agree. The Oathbringer ending is just like so much that I should probably go back and reread that part of the book, because it is so much happening.
It's a lot of stuff happening, but I super enjoyed it. But we're not there yet. So did you read Mistborn Era 2 before or after you started Stormlight?
I think it broke up Stormlight for me.
Okay. So did you read in publication order?
Let me see if I can find this list real quick.
Other than your starting points, because obviously I don't like overloaded endings, but I was so invested in Oathbringer. I loved Oathbringer so much, because everyone kept telling me that I wasn't going to like Oathbringer, and I loved it, and I was so excited by the endings. I loved it.
I think I have it on my phone, because this way I can have my reading order somewhere.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so it went, let's see. So I read The Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, then Shadows of Silence, Six of Ducks, Alloy of Law. So yeah, there was a big gap. I didn't realize how big of a gap there was between some of the Yeah, I read a lot in between Words of Radiance and Oathbringer. I read basically all of Mistborn Era 2, all of White Sands, all of the essays in Arcanum Unbounded. Wow, and a bunch of his short stuff in there. Yeah.
So what did you think of Arcanum Unbounded?
I don't know. It was just like one of those like extra. It felt like extra. None of
Yeah.
it felt like it was super important or anything that you couldn't skip. But it was just kind of like those extra teasers that you kind of get in the world, which is nice when you try to
Yeah.
look at it as a whole.
Hmm.
But you know, I don't think it was anything like earth
So
shattering.
the only one that I loved was Emperor's Soul. I loved
Okay.
Emperor's Soul so
Yeah.
much. In terms of his novellas and short stories in general, I don't love them because they're not that short.
They are not.
Like
Yeah.
Dawn
Dawn Shard's a
Shard,
book. Dawn
yeah,
Shard's
Dawn
just a book.
Shard is fully a novel. I looked at the word count. I think it's something along the lines of like 54 or 56,000 words. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's a novel.
Yeah.
Mistborn, Secret History, and Edge Dancer definitely do, and Emperor Soul edge under that novella status. But I'm like, I don't know why we're calling Dawn Shard a novella because
Yeah,
it most certainly is not a novella.
it is not. I remember going to read that and thinking I hadn't looked how long it was beforehand. It's like I'll be able to knock this out super quick, and then I was like, this is a whole book.
I thought
This
that
is
too.
absolutely
I
a whole
was
book.
like, oh, I'll finish this in an afternoon. No. It
Yeah,
was
absolutely not.
many days. I was like, oh, this was not the same thing as reading Secret History at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, a completely different reading experience. But a lot of people were telling me because I had most of the stuff that I had left at the end was a few of the shorter things in Arcanum Unbound. I had Rhythm of War, Edge Dancer, Dawn Shard, and Sunlit Man. Like that was my last grouping of things. And then I finished Rhythm of War because I was like, I'm into Stormlight now. I'm just gonna like power through and finish this. And then I was like, all right, I'm gonna do Arcanum Unbounded. And I didn't love really any of the stories.
Yeah.
So I thought Six of the Dusk was interesting. Of all of the other small ones, I was like, okay, this is the one that I'm probably the most interested in. Forest in the Silence of Hell or whatever it's called, like I really didn't like.
I thought it was fine. It wasn't anything special, but it was fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree, Daniel. I agree. But in terms of novellas, do you have a preferred novella for the cause?
Emperor Soul.
Emperor Soul.
Yeah,
Okay.
Emperor Soul. It's definitely like head and shoulders above all of the other ones.
Are you like me in that you're not super fond of Lift?
So I don't have anything against her, but I also don't really care too much about her. I think there's going to be some. I was saying this while you were disconnected. I think there's going to be some very interesting Cosmere stuff with Lift.
Yeah.
But outside of that, every now and again she's kind of fun when she like does something a little silly, and sometimes to break up some of the heavier stuff that is happening, especially in Stormlight. Those are tomes. Yeah. There's a lot happening. To get that little bit of brevity every now and again is fine. But did I need like a whole novella for her? Not really.
No, I can't stand her.
Okay.
I'm glad you like her, Shad, but no, she's just not for me. So I also really struggle with Wayne's character. I don't like Wayne either. And I don't like Lopin. So I realized that this is just like a trend for me. Yeah. That when Sanderson writes that really off the wall character, I'm like, I don't like these people in real life. Like, I'm not going to like reading about them either. So,
yes. So it's funny you say that with Wayne, because Wayne was somebody I was kind of fine with for the first book. I was like, oh, he's whatever.
Yes.
Second book, he's still fine. Then by the third book, I'm like, okay. And then I had a lot of problems with what happens with him in the last book. Like a lot. Yeah. It's one of the things that really made me not enjoy the Lost Metal because of some of the things that happened with him. So
did you not like the Lost Metal then?
I gave it 3 stars. So I mean, I thought it was still good, but it felt a little unnecessary. And then just some of the problems I ended up having with him as a character just really kind of dragged it down for me.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at Era 2, just because in terms of time periods that he's attributed to these storylines, right? I thought it was really interesting. Okay, we've jumped a couple hundred years ahead. And I mean, this isn't really spoilery, but the magic is different, right? In Era 2. And I was
Hmm.
like, oh, okay. The
I was
rules.
not ready for that.
Yeah, I wasn't either. And I was like, okay, the rules are different. So I'm okay with this in the sense that we're kind of getting a clean slate, but we have a history here. So when it came to reading them, the book that I liked the most out of Era 2 was The Bands of Mourning, because that was, in my opinion, the most lore connective, I felt like, and then also really just building upon what was now there. And Lost Metal felt really unfinished in a lot of ways.
Yes. 100%.
And I was like, what is going on here? Because this isn't like an old book. This is newly published.
Right.
And I mean, new being a relative term. I think it was the previous year that it came out. But it just didn't feel as refined as some of the stuff that we had been seeing from him, especially compared to Bands of Mourning. I was like, okay, Bands of Mourning felt really fleshed out. It felt really well done with its characters. I love Steris so much.
I do too. Yep.
Yeah, I'm a total Steris stan. I don't feel like she gets any of the love that she deserves. And I love that we had the Khandra in Era 2 as such prominent figures. I was like, oh, excellent, because Tensoon is like on my heart. I love Tensoon so much. So really enjoyed that part about Era 2, but then felt super let down by Lost Metal. I was like, oh, I feel like this was supposed to be a lot grander than it is.
That was the biggest problem I had with it. I remember reading it and just being like, I was like, I understand like the implications it's trying to do with some of the things that are discovered in the Lost Metal. Like, I get that, but I don't know, you could have just discovered that in like a novella instead of this whole book.
Yeah.
It felt like there was something that needed to happen for the greater Cosmere.
Yeah.
And it ended up getting smashed into this book.
Yes.
And there's so much that happens in the Bands of Mourning that I thought was going to end up in the Lost Metal that just doesn't. I can't say that without it just being like massive spoilers.
Well, we're gonna have spoilery chat in a little bit, so we can talk a bit about it then. But
but I just remember reading it and just being like, what is going on here? That it felt like just such a. I think when I did my review for it, I think I titled it something like "It's a Cosmere stepping stone" or something, because that's really just what it felt like to me. That this is something that needed to happen for books that are going to be coming in 15 years from now.
Yeah, I know.
So
super confusing when that's the case too. I mean, it's super complicated now, I feel like. And people keep saying, oh, you can read the Cosmere in whatever order you want, or like you don't have to read everything. I'm like, not anymore.
It's getting dangerously close to like that. Is some of the earlier stuff, sure, you can get away with it, but as some of this more modern stuff comes out, like imagine Sunlit being your first Cosmere book.
I know, and some people are still saying, they're like, oh, you can read Sunlit Man on its own. I'm like, no.
I mean you can. Nothing stops you, but would I recommend it? Do I think it's a good idea? No.
Yeah, probably not. So we've talked about Era 2 a little bit. We now have to talk about Stormlight, and then we'll talk about our year of Sanderson standalone type books. So my starting with Stormlight was highly questionable in that I really didn't like Way of Kings. So everyone told me after I read Mistborn Era 1, and I was raving about Warbreaker and this fantasy group I'm a part of. I was like, see you, Daniel. Thanks for stopping by. I was so excited because I was like, oh my God, Warbreaker, so great. Loved it. Phenomenal, blah, 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 blah. And everyone was like, wait till you read Way of Kings. It's so much better. And I was like, great. Like, I'm geared up to do this, and sat down, opened it, and I was like, okay, this is a lot of information for a prologue. And I was like, oh, another prologue and another prologue. Like, it just felt like the prologues didn't stop. And I was like, what is happening here? Because in my brain, I kept waiting for the stuff from the prologue, like the first prologue with the heralds and the Knights Radiant to come back. And I was like, taking a long time here. And I didn't love Way of Kings, but it then took me a really long time. I think I read Way of Kings in March, and I didn't pick up Words of Radiance until October.
Oh, okay. So that's a big gap.
Yeah, it was a big gap. So I assume you did not have the same reaction I did to Way of Kings.
I did not. I really liked the Way of Kings. I will say kind of like you, I forget exactly what part it was. I wish I could find it, but I remember I was talking to some friends, and I was probably like 40-ish% of the way into the book, and I was like,
Mhm.
I don't like this is like it's good, but it's like
It's
not
fine.
not what everyone is talking about. This is
Yeah.
not really what I expected. This is just kind of I was
Yep.
like, there's so much going on. I'm sure it will all make sense at some point, but this is a lot to just
Yes.
like dive into. And it's not the first time I've read a series where you just kind of have to trust the process
Yes.
and go through it. But I was like, people talk about this like it's the best thing that's ever happened, and
I know.
I'm just not there yet.
Hmm.
And then by the time I finished the book, I ended up really, really liking it
Okay.
and everything that happened and just how great it was. Um, I would say I think if I reread it, I would enjoy it even more because I'm currently listening to um, it's called Lost in Roshar. I
Yep.
forget it's with Jimmy
Jimmy's
and
podcast. Yeah.
yeah, and I've been listening to that and going through it as they go through it chapter by chapter. I'm just like, there's so much happening here, especially coming back to it with
Yeah.
having read it all. It's just great, and so I really think that if I reread it, I would enjoy it a lot more. But even in the time, and then I went straight into Words of Radiance after that, and the hype
Yeah.
was real because I've heard
Oh,
so many people talk about Words of Radiance and
yes.
how it's the best of them for a lot of people, and it
Yeah.
is for me. It's one
Yeah.
of so last year I gave out 3 5 stars, and Words of Radiance was one of them. It's one of
Yeah.
the best books I've ever read, and I love that book.
Hmm.
So yeah, and then
I also loved Words of Radiance. Yeah, I
okay,
was freaking out when reading this book. So when I finished Way of Kings, I was like, okay, this is fine. Like I
mhm,
liked parts of the book very much.
sure,
And at this point I was like, I'm invested in the Cosmere, so I'm gonna have to buck up and read these eventually.
yeah,
And we got COVID for the first time in October. So I was like, I'm stuck at home. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna read this book. And the second the prologue was Yasna for book 2, I was like, I'm in. Because
okay,
Yasna for me is my spirit guide. I'm like,
okay,
girlfriend and I are very similar in our personalities. And I was like, all right, I'm here for Yasna. So got through the prologue and I was like, that was substantially better than I feel like anything I read in book 1. And
okay,
then we got into the book and I was like, okay, Shallan is way less infuriating. And I was like, whoa, Shallan's interesting now. Like,
oh, I
what is
loved her in that.
happening
I
here?
When I finished Words of Radiance, I was like, she's my favorite character.
Yeah, she was
Yeah,
so
loved her.
interesting. And I hated her from Way of Kings. Like, she actively was probably 70% of the reason I hated that book so
Okay,
much. Um, so I was so surprised when I was reading Words of Radiance. I was like, oh, I'm actually excited for Shallan chapters. Like, that's new. And all of the characters that I had problematic relationships with in book 1, I felt pretty much were resolved by book 2. And I
okay,
found that Sanderson really found his voice in Words of Radiance. I was like, okay, the plot is still slow, which I'm okay with now. Because
hmm
when I went into Way of Kings, I was like, I know it's going to be slow, but I didn't realize how slow it was going to be.
yeah,
And it's an adjustment if you're not quite used to that type of reading experience and
yeah,
setting, especially coming off of reading his standalones first. I was like, oh, this is very different.
hmm
And I there was I was gearing up to read the duel scene, and my husband, who has not read this, I was on fire when I read that scene. Like, I went into our basement and I sat in front of him and I was like, I just read one of the most epic scenes that
yes,
I've ever read in my life. And he was like, that's great. And I was like, no, no. And then I sat down in front of him and I explained the whole thing. I gave the context of the first book and this book. And I was like, and just went off at him for probably like 40 minutes.
yeah.
And at the end of it, he looked at me and was like, I'm really glad you liked it. And I was like, I was so devastated. I was like, this is one of the best scenes that I've ever read in my life. And I'm so excited about it. But that whole book from start to finish for me was just
Yeah,
fire. So
yeah,
good.
I completely agree. It's like there in some of the, especially Rhythm of War, I feel like there's a lot that
Yeah.
could get trimmed and everything, but Words of Radiance and like every single page is just like
Yeah.
excellent. And I remember, I'm pretty sure I was at the gym on the treadmill after I had lifted, and I remember like listening to it and just being like, all right, you can't like have tears in the gym. You got to like hold it together while this is happening, because it was just like such an epic moment. That happened also to me in to Rhythm of War for sure. There's a chapter that I was like, I'm in the gym after I lift. I always do my cardio, and I'm walking, and I remember I stepped off on the side of the treadmill and was like looking down and being like, you got to take a deep breath. You can't just be in here being the random guy crying on the treadmill.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I don't tear up when I read. I'm generally not a tearful reader, but like if
Me
you
either,
put something
but-
sad in front of me on television, I'm done in like a matter of seconds. It's ridiculous.
See, it doesn't even have to be something sad. It just, so I'm like a moments person. So like there are just some of these moments where certain, like I feel stuff coming together, and it can be like a heroic thing. It can be sad, but like, and that's a lot of times that's how I know a book is going to be like a 5-star for me. If it can get that reaction from me and give me one of those moments, it's definitely like, it's up there.
That's so funny. Okay. So I loved Words of Radiance so much. And then everyone said to me, except one person, they were like, 2 people, I lied. They were like, get ready for Oathbringer to really be a letdown. And I was like, really? Because like Words of Radiance is so good. And I was like, all right, fine. Like, but I still was thinking, I'm not like, while Words of Radiance was amazing, I was like, I remember my feelings about Way of Kings. So I'm still not entirely sold on this series. I'm sold on Words of Radiance, but maybe not Stormlight Archive. So I started Oathbringer, and I was like, oh, it's Dalinar. Okay. Like, because the Colin family is probably my favorite characters. Like, I love the Colin family. And I was super excited for Dalinar flashbacks. And the more the book went on, I was like, I don't know what people are talking about. Oathbringer is great. Like, I was so excited reading Oathbringer. And then we got to the Shadesmar stuff, and I was like, I am in. Like, Oathbringer is choice. Like, I loved the Shadesmar stuff. And then the ending, kind of, we touched on that a little bit with it being a lot of information, but like so much stuff is revealed, and you're like, whoa, this has been a ride. This journey. So when I got to the end of Oathbringer, I was like, 5 stars, loved it, loved the whole thing, start to finish, loved it. But I know you didn't feel the same way.
So looking, it's good I looked at that list. I didn't realize how big of a break I took in between Words of Radiance and Oathbringer. And so I think maybe part of it is when I read it, I was so ready to get back to Stormlight, because Words of Radiance, one of the best books I've ever read. I'm like, okay, I just got through all this stuff. Like the Wax and Wayne stuff is fine. All this other stuff. White Sands was a whole experience in and of itself. And then I get to it, and the Shadesmar part is kind of what killed me, actually.
Really? I love it so much.
Which is funny, because in Rhythm of War, that's like the stuff I really like about it. So I don't know what it was so much about in Oathbringer that I was just kind of like, whatever we're doing down here, whatever. Can we get this going? And it's funny. And one of the only people I know in real life who has read this, Oathbringer is her favorite. And so I was, ready to love it as much as she did. And I mean, I still really like it. I mean, there's not a Stormlight book that I think is bad or not really good. It just happens to be my least favorite of the 4.
Okay, so it's your least favorite. Way of Kings is still my least favorite.
Okay, yeah, it's not by much. It and Rhythm of War are pretty close. It's legitimately that one chapter in Rhythm of War that just hit me like so perfectly that it kind of got the bump over Oathbringer.
Yeah, so I had seen your ratings or whatever for your books of the year or whatever, and I was like, okay, I'm in the middle of Rhythm of War right now. So when you were talking about it, I was like, interesting that he's ranked it above Oathbringer, because I love Oathbringer, as I just declared on the internet. And I remember you saying, I think it's chapter 108.
Yeah.
You were like, this one chapter, and I was like, okay, like, I'm not that far off. And for some reason in my brain, I registered that as 98 or like 94 or something.
Okay.
So when I
just
got
like a
to
random
this
chapter,
I was like, what is he talking about? And I was like, this is so basic. Like, what is
Yeah.
happening? And then I went and I rewatched your video and I was like, I was very wrong on the number here because
Yeah.
this was not what was happening at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
But
think part of it maybe was, I listened to it on audio, and
I did
he
too for
does he
Rhythm of
does he does such a good job of narrating that scene and everything that's happening there.
yeah,
And yeah, it was just, I don't know, it was just perfect for me. It's just one of those perfect moments in the series for me.
that's cool. So, what did you think of our secret project books for the year of Sanderson? I will say I have not yet finished Sunlit Man. It is my one Cosmere read left. And I also haven't completed all of White Sand. I couldn't get my hands on the omnibus. So I was like, I'm just going to wait.
I couldn't either.
Yeah, I'm going to wait until he republishes it as a book. And I was like, that's fine.
Funny
but
enough,
I understand what's going on in White Sand. So it's not the worst thing.
With White Sands, I actually listened because I couldn't get a copy of it anywhere either. And I was like, there's these random audio renditions of it. I'm going to listen to those.
Audios?
Yeah, I was like, I don't enjoy this style of audio very much. I normally just kind of like a straightforward narration. I don't like all the sound effects and everything, but I was like, this is legitimately the only way I can get a hold of it. Yeah, and so I did that, which maybe affected my opinion, but I think most people are kind of with me that it's some of the weaker stuff. But as far as the secret project stuff, so obviously I hadn't gotten to it at the time they were all releasing. So I heard so much about all of them beforehand. So I don't know if maybe that skewed me a little bit because I expected a lot more from Tress. Like, I still liked Tress. I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it, but it didn't like blow me away or anything. I mean, I thought it was, the fairy tale-esque, like kind of light, but still serious with some interesting stuff. The planet is super cool. All of that kind of stuff. But I just thought it was like, it was a good, really good book. I gave it 4 stars, so it's not like I didn't like it or anything. But it didn't like blow me away when it came to Tress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love Tress.
Okay.
Tress was, so as I said, I haven't read Sunlight Man, but I prefer Tress to Yumi. Okay. I think it's because Hoyt is narrating in a really enjoyable way for me in Tress. Like, I know that Sanderson's humor is really hit or miss for people. And I found for me, which was interesting because when he announced Yumi, he's like, it's also Hoyt narrating. I was like, okay, so I should like it. And I was like, no, he's narrating in a very different way.
It's very, it is.
I don't like this.
Yeah, it is very. Yumi's my favorite of the 3. And I have Tress and Sunlit like really neck and neck. When I finished Sunlit, I think I was maybe riding the high of like, I did it, I finished the Cosmere and everything, and I had it a little bit above Yumi. Now they're like so neck and neck that I think I said this in my video, I think that book will really depend on some of the stuff we get in future Stormlight stuff. Will kind of change maybe how I feel about that.
Sure.
But yeah, Yumi was the one I liked the most. For those 2 characters just ended up working together for me really well. I liked everything that was going on there. I don't think it has like the strongest plot of any of Sanderson's books or anything like that. It's very much like a slice of life character study between these 2, which it just worked for me. So I enjoyed it. That's and then cool. Sunlit is such an interesting book because, like I just said, so much could change how I feel about it when we get more information, because it does feel like a book that came out in like a weird time. Like, it feels like this was a story he had and he wanted to maybe do this Year of Sanderson thing. And he's like, well, I have this book. It can come out now. It's not really going to affect anything. It's kind of interesting foreshadowing and seeing how, lining up maybe some predictions of what's going to happen in Stormlight 5 and on. But like the book itself isn't anything that special. Like if you didn't know anything about the Cosmere and you read that book, I don't know what you get from it.
Yeah, so I started it last week and I was like, I'm not being pulled into this, which is rare for me with a Sanderson book. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to give it a little bit of breathing room.
I think it makes sense for you, though, because you're not the biggest fan of the Sanderlanche part. That whole book is basically Sanderlanche.
So
it
I'm
is.
just waiting. Yeah, I feel like I'm I'll know when the right time is.
Yeah.
You know, it's just one of those things that I'm like, I'll just feel like I need a little bit of Cosmere-ness, and I'll jump back in, even though I'm rereading Warbreaker this month. Like I haven't
Nice.
left the Cosmere completely, but
Yeah.
okay. So we've talked about the books in general now. So I want us to start having spoilery conversations. So I'm going to say to everyone, we are going to start talking about spoilers. So I'm going to put up a banner here saying spoilers. So if you do not want spoilers for the Cosmere, this is the last time I'm saying spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. Thanks for stopping by. All right. So what are your major predictions going into Stormlight 5?
So yeah, we talked about this a little bit before.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, and I just think a lot of people are going to die. That's
Yeah.
which grand prediction, people are going to die, but I do
Yeah.
think that it's going to be a much darker book than people are going to be expecting. And I think that just because this series is supposed to be so big and epic, and I think it's going to have a lot of far-reaching things outside of just Roshar, that it's going to almost be time for like a new cast of characters. Like we're at the you know the pinnacle of what can happen on Roshar with the people we have, and to go forward into the next era, we're going to have not all new faces, but different faces kind of being the characters we're following.
Sure. So you and I differ, I think, a little bit on our predictions for Kaladin. I think. Oh, my light's flickering. So
I saw that one.
Brace yourselves, everybody. Ooh, it's getting bright again. So if I go black here in a second, everyone knows why. But I think Kaladin will become a herald because someone in a Cosmere group I was in actually broke down his name. And the meaning of the name Kaladin is born into eternity. And I was like, okay, he's definitely going to become a herald.
So yeah, I've heard a couple interesting theories with him. One, so I am more in the camp of he's going to die. Which the more I think about it, maybe the less I actually think that's going to happen. But I do think it would just be I think it would just be so shocking that maybe it's one of those things. I also think that he could I saw some people saying he could become Honor.
I also think that is a strong possibility.
So I saw that, and I think that one has a decent amount of like credence to it.
Yeah.
I same thing with your Herald theory. I think it is totally possible, and I think it's maybe possible that a couple of the characters I think who are going to die, they actually all become heralds and kind of replace the old ones because they're obviously having all kinds of issues. You know, yeah. So I could actually see a lot of the people I was saying are maybe going to be the ones who die.
Okay.
Actually, and they die in a sense, but they ascend to being more of a herald kind of role, and then that still kind of fits. We're going to get new faces for the second half, but these characters aren't going to be necessarily gone, but just different.
Yeah.
So, or they could be gone. They could all be back on what is it? Braze? Is that how it?
Yes.
Call it?
Braze.
So they're there, but they're not there. They're there, anguishing and doing all that while things on Roshar are still happening. I could see something like that happening.
My theory is that Teft is Teft is going to be a POV on Braze. Is my theory. Because I don't trust Sanderson to let people die and keep them dead. Like we have Wayne who's died, and I feel like Wayne probably will stay dead, but because so much talk has been about Braze, especially in Rhythm of War, I'm like, okay, we're definitely getting a POV on Braze. And I feel like it's not going to be one of the fused, and I don't think it's going to be Taravangian, aka Podium now. I think the only real perspective that would make sense is Taft. So I'm curious to see if that ends up being the case. And I don't know whether or not I want it to be. So Braze, to my understanding, is spirit world. It's basically like heaven for the fused. But I'm wondering, well, not quite heaven, but like it's where your spirit goes after they've been killed. But I'm wondering if everyone's spirit goes there that's killed by a shard blade. That's kind of my theory, because that would be super interesting if that's the way that they choose to go, because then you could also have POVs from Gavilar and conversations with him. But I don't know if this is something I want.
Right.
But
Yeah.
also I'm like, it could potentially be really interesting. So I'm not entirely sure.
No, I agree that we need to get a little bit more from Braze. That
Yeah.
it was talked about so much, and it feels like it's obviously very important because that's where the heralds go and are holding back the fused and everything. So I feel like we need something from there.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how we'll get it.
I'm almost wondering. I kind of wonder if Moash is going to take up the punishment. Like at some point, I wonder if that's going to be Moash's fate. And I'm like, okay, will it be his POV? Because maybe I don't know, because I feel like historically when Sanderson builds up a bad guy, he then kind of does a 180 on the bad guy, and he's like, but they're actually kind of good. And I'm like, okay.
That's one thing I hope does not happen with Moash.
Really?
I said it. Yeah, I don't want any redemption arc for him. I feel like I know he does like to do that. Personally, I do not think every time a character does something bad that they need to be redeemed. Like there are things that just aren't redeemable, and I think it's okay to not try to like fix that. Like just let those actions have consequences. But it wouldn't surprise me if that's not what happens.
Yeah. So in terms of this, my understanding is that it is a spirit world, and this is confirmed with the conversations between Navani and the fused that she's working with, whose name is escaping me at this very moment. It's not Rubiel. That's not her name.
Reborial? Is that how you say it?
Something like that.
It's something like that. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, so it's the fuse that she's working with, and she confirms that that's what Braze is. But do you think Kelsier is going to become a shard?
Do I think Kelsier is going to become a shard? I think that's what his goal is going to be.
Yeah.
Will he actually accomplish it? I'm going to go with no.
Okay.
But he's definitely going to try, because I've heard some things where a lot of this is leading to a confrontation between the Mistborn planet, which for some reason I can't remember its name, and Roshar. Yes. Yeah. So there's going to be some kind of Scadrial versus Roshar showdown.
Yeah.
In some way, shape, or form. With obviously Kelsier like at the head of that.
Yeah.
I guess they could definitely make it where he is a shard, and that would help the Kaladin is now honor that kind of battle. So I could see it happening, but I'm going to go with no. I'm going to go with just right now, no. It's something he's going to pine for and want, but just kind of be denied.
So I'm in the camp that even though I enjoy Kelsier, I don't think Kelsier's a good dude.
He's not. No, I'm right there with you. He is not a good guy. Because I remember reading The Final Empire and being like, he's a little unhinged. He is a track. Yeah, he's a little unhinged, and he has a one-track mind, and there's no changing it. There's no deviating from it. He's very much the Lord Ruler in that sense, where he thinks his way is the only way, and there's nothing anybody else should question about that. And which is always a little funny, because his whole thing is to go against the Lord Ruler, and he doesn't realize the reflection in the mirror is himself a little bit.
Yes. So I am really curious to see how this is going to go. And it's interesting because obviously there's this stuff going on with Moash, right? And then in Rhythm of War, I feel like up until Rhythm of War, you're like, I can relate with Moash, because you're like, wants to kill Elhokar, because let's be real, Elhokar was useless. Pretty much like right at the end is when he started to kind of turn around just slightly, and you're like, okay. And then Moash kills him, and you're like,
yeah, it was about to happen, and then
right. And then when he kills Teft, you're like, nope, unforgivable.
See, I was there when he kills Elhokar. I'm like, this is the exact opposite of everything Kaladin was trying to tell you about.
Yeah,
this is
like
I remember reading that and being so annoyed that he hits a Bridge 4 salute. I'm like, there's no way you just did that. After everything you and Kaladin have been talking about and how explicit Kaladin was that, like, no, this is not the right way. This is not what you should do. This is bad. And then you
Yeah.
have the audacity to be like, peace, man. Appreciate it. Like, there's no, come on, what are you talking about? So from
That's
that point
funny.
on, I wanted bad things to happen to him.
So I really wasn't there because when I was reading Moash initially, I was like, he's just like Kelsier. Like they're really very similar in that they're both the oppressed and they want to go after the oppressors. And I was like, fine. Like I get it completely. And when you think about Moash's life in terms of how he gets to where he gets in Way of Kings, I'm like, it's totally unfair. And then when he reveals his background story to Kaladin, I'm like, yep. And in Way of Kings, I really liked Moash because he was the only one that really pushes Kaladin. And one of the big problems for me with Way of Kings was Kaladin. I am not a Kaladin stan, and I know a lot of people are.
That wasn't either in Way of Kings.
Yeah, he just kind of grated on me a lot of the time.
Yeah, he was not for me.
Yeah, and I liked that Moash had that relationship with him that he could push on Kaladin a little bit. And one of my issues with Kaladin is almost that he's too forgiving at times. And I'm like, I get that, that's sort of part of being a Radiant and like his type of Radiant specifically. But I'm like, it makes sense to me that Moash isn't that way, And when he kills Elhokar, I'm like, all right, like.
See, for me, it was he betrayed. It's not. I didn't have a problem with any of his like motivations or anything like that. It's the betrayal of him to Kaladin in that moment.
Yeah.
That it's like, come on, man. So like, I agree with everything you're saying, and I get it. But it's the betrayal of like that relationship in that moment that is supposed to be there with them. That I think is like that's what severed it for me.
Well, what's interesting is because I texted Bookborn after I read this book because I was like, no, like I had read the tax scene and I was like, I am not forgiving Moash, and she was like, it's interesting because it's true, Moash is the worst, but he's clearly not in complete control. And I was like, thinking about it again, he's just like Kelsier. Kelsier now has a spike through his eye. And as we know, even though Ruin isn't in Ruin's form anymore, those spikes still do weird stuff to you and you don't have full control over your faculties. And I'm like, Moash and Kaladin are doing these very parallel journeys, and yet the fandom views them as entirely different entities. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, I could definitely. So this is a little bit back to that redemption that Sanderson could do for him. It could be Moash shaking off. There's definitely some weird stuff going on with him that I don't fully think anybody knows exactly what it is yet. No. And so I could definitely see like him shedding that and like having like a heroic moment again. And I'll hate it because that's not what I want. But I can definitely see that kind of thing happening with him, that he isn't his like true self, I guess would maybe be the best way to say it, right? He's not the person that even he would probably want to be, but I don't want that for him. I just want that.
I agree. Okay. So I assume we're getting the duel next book between the champions, right? Like if that doesn't happen,
it's supposed to be in 10 days. So I saw some people talking about this, that I think it was the Shardcast. I don't know if you've watched any of their stuff.
I have not, no.
Okay. It's the 17th Shard. They're like the people who do
I'm
that.
Familiar with the 17th Shard,
Okay, so it's their podcast.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure it was them. I was watching one of theirs, and they were theorizing that, was it them or was it someone else? Doesn't matter. They were theorizing that the duel is not going to be like the climax of Winds and Truth. That it might be something that happens like halfway of the book, because I feel like you can't, because we know this is the end of like this little mini arc. You can't end with that duel and have all of these questions and then make me wait until 2040 for the next book.
I know.
Unless all of a sudden we're getting like super heavy tie-ins with Elantris and the Mistborn Era 3 stuff, unless we are getting like direct interaction with Roshar, I feel like you can't end with the duel and it be satisfying in any real way, because the outcome of that duel has so much riding on it that I think that a lot of things have to happen after it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So who do you think the champions are going to be?
So I mean, Dalinar seems very adamant for it to be himself. I
Yeah.
would not be surprised if that's not what happens. But right now, without me just like, speculating because I
Yeah.
want it to be different, I'm gonna go with it is Dalinar. I Part of me loves and hates the baby champion theory. Are you familiar with that one?
No.
So it goes back to one of the death rattles in Way of Kings.
Uh-huh.
I wish I knew exactly what it says, but it basically says something along the lines of I'm holding a knife to the throat of a child and the world wants me to do it, but I know I can't or something. And it's basically the theory is that Dalinar, the champion is going to be his grandson. That Odium's champion will be Dalinar's grandson. What's his name?
Elhakar's son?
Yes, it'll be
Okay.
Elhakar's son.
But
And
he's
that
like
I
5.
know exactly. That's the point. And Dalinar will lose the duel because he won't be able to do it. He won't be able to kill him, and then therefore Odium wins the duel. That's one theory, which
Huh.
it's a little out there, but it's supported by that one random death rattle that have
Yeah.
all come true, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I also saw some theorizing that the duel is never going to happen. Because if you remember at the end of Rhythm of War, when Taravangian becomes Odium, he
Yep.
realizes there's an out, basically, in
Yeah.
the contract. And so I saw some things of people theorizing that the duel is never going to actually happen, that in the 10 days leading up to when the duel is supposed to be, basically everything goes crazy and the duel never actually happens, which I think would be interesting. I don't know if I love that. I feel like this duel has been built up for so long that
Yeah.
something needs to happen. But
Yeah.
also at the same time, I don't know how difficult will it be to have like a duel feel epic enough for like the scale of the things that are happening.
Yeah.
It's a hard place to be.
I'm torn because I also am in camp. I think it's Dalinar. Like when Navani asks, about Kaladin, he's like, no. And I'm like,
No.
good.
Yeah.
Because I'm really over Kaladin being like the one to save everything.
Yep.
I know Kaladin is basically our main our main protagonist, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
everyone else is kind of also a protagonist, but really it's Kaladin at the center
Yeah.
of
It's
being
very Wheel of Time-esque with it's
with Rand.
Rand, but everybody else also.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I love Adolin so much. And it's such a turnaround for me because in Way of Kings, I was like, who is this guy? I was like, he's so obnoxious.
Why does he care about these coats so much?
Oh my God. His coats, all of the women not believing his father. I was like,
Yeah.
go away. Just go away. And now I'm like, oh, I love Adolin so much. And I will listen to him talk about his coats as much as he wants.
Yeah.
I love all of his coats.
Yes, maybe I can take some fashion advice. Like, let's do it.
But I'm like, I keep thinking something's got to be up with Adolin because he's not a Radiant. And I'm like, okay, he's going to have some kind of important role. He's something because obviously these Deadeyes can speak with him. Mm-hmm. Or he can prompt them to speak. We're not sure what it is yet. But
there's no way they all just show up in Shadesmar while he's there.
And they're like, hey.
Yeah, there's no way, yeah.
Haven't spoken in centuries, but we're now all here and we're all going to talk to him. So
yeah.
I'm like, I agree in the sense that I feel the duel, if it does happen, which I do hope it does because it has been built up so much for the last few books that I do feel I will feel slightly let down if it doesn't happen, that will happen probably about halfway to 2/3 in.
Okay.
And then there's going to be some mega battle, I think, at the end of the story in which I think that's where Adolin is going to shine because I think he's going to find a way to resurrect all of these friends' bonds. And that's what I was thinking was going to happen at the end of Rhythm of War. I kept waiting for all of the Spren to come in and bond people. I was like, everyone's going to have a Spren. Yeah, and that's going to turn the tides in the battle. As opposed to, Sanderson being like, it's Kaladin. And I was like, cool.
Yeah.
So, I'm thinking that will be something that happens because then that kind of sets up this new arc then for the second 5 books in that what does this world now look like with all of these new bonds, all of these new Spren and these relationships? And also if we're bonding spren like Renarin's spren, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And also because we see that the spren themselves, right, are very classist and have their own stratas of society. And I'm like, how does that then relate to the people that they bond to? Does that create internal conflict between different groups that have bonded to each other and stuff like that? So I feel like politically there's a lot that can be done with the spren going forward in Shadesmar and in regular non-Shadesmar Roshar.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see, because I almost wish that like Adolin was the champion and then has like a million
army of spren. That'd be cool. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm on the camp that I think he dies, but
I know you do, and I'm so
which would be so sad. I really do, because I'm like you. At the first book, it's like, what is this dude about? Yeah. Get out of here. And then by Rhythm of War, you're like, man, he's great. Dealing with Shallan and Kaladin, like, come on, this dude's a champion.
Yeah.
I do think the Deadeyes, something has to happen in this next book with them. I like your theory that they come, and it might even, I could see it even being after, like you said, after the duel, he comes with all of them, and it kind of like evens the battlefield kind of thing. For sure, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The only other theory I have heard about a champion that I think maybe has some credence is it ends up being Szeth.
I've seen that too.
Instead of Dalinar, technically he's sworn to Dalinar and all this stuff, and so I could see that maybe happening.
Nightblood, gotta use them.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. I mean, Nightblood is like the scariest thing out there, right? I mean,
it's so great. I love it. Okay, let me preface this. So when I started reading Warbreaker, I was like, whatever this sword is fantastic, and I love it so much. I was like, I don't even need to know what you are. You're one of the best characters in the Cosmere. And then when I got to that epilogue or whatever it was, that like end scene with Szeth, and I was like,
yes, exactly. Yes, I remember reading that. I remember reading that exact thing and being like, oh, following this reading order was actually the right thing to do.
Yeah, because I was so excited.
Because I was like, when I originally was like, I could just read Stormlight first. And I was like, no, I'm so glad that I get some of these things. And that's one of those moments where I'm like, oh yeah, it was totally worth reading all this other stuff first. 100%. Even that little moment.
Yes, I about lost my mind. And like, of course, like I want to go talk to my husband about it, who has no idea what I'm talking about. And I was like, there's this amazing connection in this character that just came back in the end of this book, and I'm so excited. And he was like, that's great. I was like, no, it's like the best character. So I ended up texting all these people on Discord that are Cosmere fans, and I was like, Nightblood! Like, I was so excited.
Yeah.
But then I was interesting because when I was reading Words of Radiance, I messaged Kyle from Read by Kyle, and I was like, I am willing to put money on the fact that I think Zeal is Vasher. I was like, for some reason, this is who I think Vasher is. And then later, in Oathbringer, I was like, Azure is 100% Vivenna. And then it became very clear. I was like, all right, cool. So I thought that was really fun. And I agree. It was one of those few reading order things where a lot of places and people said, you should probably read Warbreaker before you read Stormlight, and I was happy I did, because that Nightblood reveal is so good if you've read it in that order.
Yeah, I remember reading and just being like, hold on a second, is that what I think it is?
Yeah, exactly.
And just being like super excited for it. Yeah, and just there's another awakened thing. So it's not a big spoiler because it doesn't really do anything, but there's something in Stormlight or in Sunlit Man where they refer to something as an awakened object.
Yeah.
And I'm super interested to see in this next era of Mistborn, because it's supposed to be like early computer technology.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm curious on if there are basically awakened objects. And that they're different. Obviously, Nightblood is this very particular awakened thing that does something crazy. But I'm curious on if there's more like mundane awakened objects that we're going to see in like Era 3 and stuff.
Mm-hmm. I will say I am less excited about Era 3 of Mistborn than I am of getting sequels to Elantris, because Elantris has been so prevalent in other Cosmere books in a way that I didn't expect.
Me either. Yeah, especially with it just being a standalone, I was like, okay, it'll, and it being so early on, I was like, he probably didn't have like the whole Cosmere idea fleshed all the way out yet. And it's like, Elantris references are everywhere, like all over the place, all the time. Yeah.
I mean, we have Galadon in Stormlight, right? He's part of that trio that's like hunting Hoid. We have the magic in Mistborn Secret History. We then have it mentioned in, well, we have one of the people in Tress, and I'm like,
Tress,
it's everything.
All over, all over the place, yeah.
I was surprised.
That and Bress are mentioned a lot too.
Yeah, which I'm happy with because I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
I will say I was so bummed when he released his working order.
Oh, there was no.
I was like, there's no Nightblood sequel on here. Like, I just keep getting dragged along thinking, okay, I mean, like, keep getting dragged along. I've read the Cosmere a year ago, you know, but like, I'm so into this sequel now for Warbreaker, even though I feel that Warbreaker really doesn't need a sequel. I just want more time with Nightblood because Nightblood's so great.
Yeah.
I'm wondering though, if the sequel we're going to get is going to give us the death of Vasher, because we know that Vasher technically died and then somehow was brought back as the heel. So I'm wondering if that's going to be our filler story for that.
That's probably a good guess.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if we get the journey of Vivenna becoming Azure and him becoming Zeal. But do you think Shallan's going to be a world hopper, or do you think Shallan is going to bite it in Stormlight?
Yeah, no. So I think part of her becoming a world hopper is actually why I think Adolin dies.
Okay.
Because I don't think she would leave him on Roshar and go and explore, but I think it makes way too much sense for her as a character to be a world hopper. I think it's so obvious that like she's, you know, the scientist kind of person, very wants to explore and experience all these things. I think it just makes too much sense for her not to be a world hopper, but no way she just like leaves behind Adolin, right? Like,
I'm gonna be.
He's got to go. He's got to.
I'm gonna be so upset, Tom. I'm not gonna be able to cope well with this, because honestly, if you had told me when I read Way of Kings, Adolin might die, I would have been like, good. You know?
Whatever. Yeah.
Like, now I'm like, no, Adolin's the best boy, and we should all have an Adolin in our life that can dress us and tell us everything that's wonderful. Love. Part
of me thinks that nothing ever really came of him killing Sadeas, right? Like that is like a major thing that happened that's just kind of been like, oh, well, I could totally see there being like somebody still loyal to Sadeas coming and getting him when it seems like the worst possible opportunity. Just, I don't know. It's a very random thought, but I could see something like, because it just feels like that's such a weird thread that just is like lost in the wind.
Now that I think about it, I almost wonder if that's what's standing in the way of him becoming a Radiant in some way, shape, or form. Because obviously Shallan is like murdering everybody, but you know, she is she's bonded to a cryptic, so they're a very specific type of Radiant. Whereas Adolin would 100% not bond to cryptic, like at all. He would bond whatever the equivalent of a golden retriever spren is. Like that would be Adolin's friend. But I wonder if that has somehow impeded him from being able to say oaths and being deemed not worthy in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I could see that. I could also just see, so I definitely think like narratively, that makes a lot of sense. I could also just, it be a Sanderson being like, I don't want everybody to be a Radiant.
Which I agree with. It should not be everybody. And I actually kind of like that he's not a Radiant.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's actually such a huge plus for him that there's so much sameness when it comes to everybody. It's like, everybody's saying O's. It's kind of nice that he hasn't.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good theory of like, if that hadn't happened, could he have gotten the chance to? Is that like holding him back? I definitely can see that.
Yeah, I am curious though. Like, I didn't love Navani bonding. Did you?
No, I did not either. I don't think. I watched Sanderson talk about Rhythm of War at one point, and he was talking about how she just had slowly become a main character, and I wish she had. I felt like in general she was like the epitome of a great side character, And I think Rhythm of War itself is hurt because she becomes more of a main character. I didn't need to see the same science experiment 15 times.
Yeah.
Once or twice with her as a side character and some of the other stuff. Like you go so long between seeing what's going on in Shadesmar in Rhythm of War.
It's a whole part.
Yeah, it's a whole
part.
yeah. So it's like all that time that we're spending doing science experiments that I needed to see once instead of 15 times, that could have all been Shadesmar stuff, or just rip it out and save me a couple hundred pages.
Yeah, I felt, honestly, that was one of my major issues, and I think that's probably why it wasn't 5 stars for me, is because we went so long between Shadesmar scenes, because it's gearing up to this trial, and you're like, excellent, and then he's like, in 300 pages, and I was like, what?
At one point, I was like, is that going to be a next book thing? Like, we just end, like, is that just something that happens later that I have to wait for? I'm glad it wasn't.
I thought the same thing. I was like, oh, I'm going to be pretty upset. And then I kept wondering, I was like, are they going to show up in that save the day kind of moment at the end of this book?
Right.
And I was happy that they didn't.
Without even seeing the trial on page?
I mean more so that they didn't show up to help at the tower.
Okay.
Your theory, yeah.
Okay.
Because that's what I thought was going to happen. I thought like, oh, Adolin will win his trial, and then he's going to bring in this army of Spren, and then they're going to win, and that's going to be the end. And I was like, no. That would be really boring and, just basic. So I'm happy that that didn't happen. But yeah, I wish that we would have had more time in Shadesmar, especially because I find this stuff in Shadesmar so fascinating. Like I would read a whole book of what's happening in Shadesmar.
I'm there now.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I want to know the history of this place. And also, I almost wonder, because we're talking about Shallan becoming a world hopper, right? Like, if in some way Adolin gets bound to Shadesmar, and we know that you have to travel through Shadesmar to be a world hopper. So it's like, maybe that's how Shallan can leave, is because she knows that she can come in and out to see him or something. I don't know. I'm just hypothesizing because I want Adolin
to live. So like all that makes sense. So I can see it. I just like characters dying sometimes. So
I do too. I like a good character death as much as the next person. I just don't want it to be Adolin.
I totally understand. I am curious. I hope we get a pretty heavy dose of Shadesmar stuff in book 5. I mean, that book seems like it's going to be extremely long, which is not a problem, but I'm hoping that it's more of there's a lot of important things happening, so we're spending time in all of these places. Like, I wouldn't be upset if we spend the first chunk of that book in Shadesmar for the most part, getting that wrapped up so we know whatever's going to happen there.
Yeah.
Either that, or like you said, at the end they come back and kind of even the playing field. I could see it going both ways there.
I do wonder, because it is supposed to be 10 days time, and the travel time within Shadesmar to get back to Urithiru is a couple weeks, I believe. So,
yeah, they went, because where they're at their palace or whatever they want to call it. The honors, the high spread.
Is it lasting eternity?
Lasting eternity.
Yeah, lasting eternity. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, realistically, they shouldn't be back in time. They can't
get there. Yeah. Unless, can Dalinar open one of his, things, whatever they're called? And
I don't know. This is
which you would think if he can, they would have just jumped there to begin with. But plot, you got to write a book, so let him wander.
Right. To wrap up, what is one thing that what are you hoping to see in Winds and Truth?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm hoping that this is just like an overall thing. I'm hoping that it's tied up well enough because of the gap we're getting, which has nothing to do with the book really individually.
Right.
But I'm hoping that there is enough to like make this first section its own like story.
He says that's the case, but we'll see.
I hope so.
I hope so too.
I hope so. I hope that's there, because having to wait however long it is to book 6 is going to be bad enough, let alone if I have all these unanswered things. What I want, whatever happens, whether they win the duel, lose the duel, I want there to just be like good consequences from those things.
Yeah.
So if they lose, I would like to see how the world changes, how it affects everything. And if they do win, the same thing. I want us to be able to spend enough time there to understand what's going on. And if we can get a little bit into how that affects the greater Cosmere, that'd be great too. I think that's kind of I want it to be wrapped up enough that like I'm not agonizing for 10 years while I wait.
Right.
Yeah.
I hear you. So I think that book 5 is Zeth's flashback book and everything.
Yes.
Which makes me further think that he's probably going to be the champion now that we've been kind of talking this out a little bit, because that's kind of how he's edged on these things. So that would work for me. I'm hoping in general going forward in Stormlight that he no longer does a thing where a person in the book is dead and it's their flashback POVs, because I really wasn't into that for Ash and I in Rhythm of War. It didn't work well for me. I'm hoping that we get, like you, very clear semi-resolutions, because obviously there's going to be some kind of unanswered effects that linger on into the next phase, because then otherwise there would be no
what's the point of 5 more books?
But I'm hoping that it feels satisfactory for the first arc, almost similar to how Mistborn Era 1 felt for most people, not me at the end. But I hope that each character kind of gets their moment, especially because it's going to be such a long gap without these characters. Or, you know, for some of them probably forever, like this will be their last ride. So I hope it's a satisfactory conclusion and we get enough screen time with each person, but not too much screen time with particular people. Like I don't want as much time with the fused as we got in this,
unless it can be a little bit more interesting.
Yes, like if it's with Moash, like I'd be really interested in that, because I'm like, oh, there's deeper stuff going on here. And that really interests me. But I'm also hoping that Taravangian becomes a main POV, because
I was just about to say the same thing. I hope we get some stuff from him. For sure.
So good. And I mean, like, his whole arc has been amazing.
So wild. Just one of the wildest things. If you look from his first introduction to all the way through, it's just crazy.
I called it in Way of Kings, and this was one of my issues with Way of Kings, is that I found it a little predictory. I think that's just a word that I made up, predictory.
I like it.
But in the sense that, like, I was like, oh, he's a bad guy. Like, immediately I felt he was a bad guy. But it became more nuanced than that in Words of Radiance. And I was like, okay, this is more interesting now. And then you realize that he's not just a bad guy. There's actual motivation going on there to help people. That's made him a bad guy.
Right.
And now it's super fascinating, because his conversation with Hoyt at the end of Rhythm of War was so interesting. And I'm also wondering, are we going to meet our dragon in Winds of Truth? Are we going to meet Cultivation? Because Girlfriend is 100% a dragon. And I'm like, this would be the time.
It would be, it absolutely is. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be interesting if she could be the champion? But I don't think that's allowable. So
that would be interesting. Yeah,
it would be so fun. But thank you for coming and chatting the Cosmere.
Thanks for having me.
Super fun. Tell people where they can find you, Tom Orange.
I'm just Tom Orange on YouTube and Instagram, I think, and then same on Goodreads.
And tell people, for the most part, the stuff that you chat about on BookTube.
It's mostly fantasy and sci-fi. We'll see. I want to get back a little bit more to the classics this year, so there might be one or two of those sprinkled in. But it's mostly just reviews of what I'm doing, some fun lists, that kind of stuff. So,
well, if you are catching us on a replay, please let me know in the comments down below what you are super excited for going forward in the Cosmere. If you have any predictions, because like at this point, other than Sunlit Man, I'm completely caught up, and Tom is entirely caught up. And I'm really curious to see kind of what people's theories are going forward, because you can get lost in the Cosmere.
I still have more up here we didn't even get to, so
that'll be a part 2. We'll have to do a part 2. Maybe after I finish Sunlit Man, we can talk about Sunlit Man and our our ongoing theories, because I'll probably have some after I read that.
You will.
Most likely, yes. So thank you everyone for joining us. We super appreciate it. Everyone who have participated in our comments. And if you are not following Tom, you should go follow him. I believe his information is linked in the thing down below. If not, it will be if you are watching it on replay, because I will make sure that it's in there. But have a good night. If you are on the East Coast of the US, I hope you are safe and that you continue to have power, because this storm is nuts. So on that note, have a good night, everybody, and we'll see you next time.